The crowd was in shock as they read the notice and saw the scene in front of them. Vikir in his office explained that there was no reason to be surprised as the laws were already in place. However, this was the first time that the infamous native families would be serving the sentences. He believed that this would bring forth change and that once the destruction of either parties began, Underdog City would go through a bloodbath. Vikir turned to Chihuahua and warned him to brace himself, as he would join him in the next strategy. Chihuahua was surprised and clearly taken aback by Vikir's words. The scene changes and Chihuahua was standing in the same pose with a mask on his face. Chihuahua turned back and whispered to the occupant inside the cage, who was none other than the deputy consul, asking if this was really the right strategy. Vikir simply asked Chihuahua if he didn't trust him. As Chihuahua stood there, the place began to fill up with people. They all wore masks to conceal their identities, and slaves were also being transported, their hands bound in iron chains. Amidst the chaos, Chihuahua's thoughts turned to Vikir, who sat quietly in one of the slave cages. Chihuahua wondered if Deputy Consul being sold as a slave was a good strategy. Underdog City, located in the outskirts, was known for its unlawful events, and one such event was the slave auction. In the middle of nowhere, a huge tent was set up, and luxurious carriages started to gather around it. The products being sold were kidnapped barbarians, nobles, and commoners, all waiting to be auctioned off to the highest bidder. The Baskerville family was unaware of this unlawful event. The auctioneer, standing in front of the crowd, greeted them and welcomed them to the circus. The auctioneer noticed the arrival of Chihuahua's group. He greeted them with a smile, recognizing their signature trait as an exclusive feature of the Mont Blanc clan. He looked at their identification paper and saw that they were there as sellers. He expressed his concern that the Mont Blanc clan did not like the slaves they had purchased in the last auction, as they were precious customers who always purchased a large number of slaves. Chihuahua replied that they were satisfied with the quality of the slaves sold here. The auctioneer's attention was drawn to Vikir, who was in a cage with black hair and red eyes, a rare product. He promised to take responsibility and sell it at a good price. Chihuahua agreed and left it to him. The auctioneer bid farewell to Chihuahua Mont Blanc, hoping that he would enjoy his time at the circus. Inside the tent, the auctioneer stood on the stage as the crowd murmured amongst themselves. Some discussed the trend of mysterious-looking slaves, while others preferred pretty and good-looking slaves. Some were attracted to the tragic backstories of fallen nobles or kidnapped nobles. But everyone agreed that they hoped for many good products that day. The auctioneer then introduced the first item, a secret embezzlement by the Baskerville family's knights. It was an rank monster known as the Merciel, a cow species found in the depths of hell and said to inhabit another world. It was said to possess 19 hearts and keep attacking until all of them stop. The auctioneer listed its uses, from leather to meat, bones, and intestines, stating that nothing goes to waste. The bidding started at 100 million gold, and bidders quickly raised the price to 140 million. Then 200 million, and finally 250 million gold. The auctioneer announced that they had hit 250 million gold and asked if anyone else wanted to bid. When no one else spoke up, he slammed the hammer and declared the item sold. The auction continued with more items, each with their own unique qualities and uses. The crowd eagerly bid on each product, hoping to score a valuable purchase. And so, the slave auction at the circus continued, a dark and unlawful event that remained hidden from the eyes of the law. As the bidding for various products continued, the auctioneer urged the bidders to move on to the next product. However, a worker whispered something in his ear, and the auctioneer appeared surprised. He announced to the crowd that a rare item had arrived, picked up by the slave businessmen from a deep jungle, from a warrior tribe in the La Rouge-et-Lenoir Mountains jungles, the barbarian of Balak. A girl who appeared fierce was brought onto the stage, and the auctioneer encouraged the bidders to try and tame a wild slave, as it would be a chance to put their training techniques to the test. However, despite the auctioneer's efforts to start the bidding at 5 million, nobody placed a bid. After some time, the auctioneer lowered the initial bidding price to 3 million, but still nobody placed a bid. Eventually, the auctioneer was forced to give up and offered the girl for just 1 million gold, but still nobody wanted to buy her. The crowd began to lose interest, and the auctioneer realized that the girl was not going to sell. He asked the guard to take her away and bring out the guaranteed products instead. Suddenly, the girl tried to break free, but the guard knocked her unconscious with a punch to the stomach and took her backstage. The auctioneer then apologized for the minor incident and promised to bring out the best product of the day as compensation for the unsatisfactory auction. The best product of the day was none other than Vikir. The auctioneer introduced Vikir, describing him as a purebred boy with black hair, and red eyes who only required minimal restraints. A lady in the crowd was clearly impressed by Vikir's beauty and physique and immediately placed a bid of 600 million. The auctioneer was surprised and amused by her eagerness to bid without even announcing the starting price. Another bidder, a man, placed a bid of 800 million, which angered the lady who questioned why a male would want to take Vikir. The man replied that it was none of her business and that he wanted to use Vikir as a gladiator. Suddenly, another bidder placed a bid of 900 million. And then a bidder with the number plaque 899 raised the bid to an astonishing 6 billion. The auctioneer was surprised and asked if anyone else wanted to bid. The crowd looked towards the bidder, a masked man who was recognized by some as Baron Gambino from the granary. The people commented on his deep pockets and recent increase in wealth due to taking over underground funds. The Baron had just spent 6 billion to buy a slave, and his attendant expressed concern that he was spending too much. However, the Baron was confident that he could resell the slave for a higher price in the capital and still make a profit. The attendant raised another issue, telling that he would only profit if the slave's body remained unscathed. This angered the Baron, who lashed out at her and reminded her that he had taken her in when she had nowhere to go and now she was arrogantly biting the hand that fed her. The auctioneer announced that customer 99 was the winning bidder for the slave, Vikir. As Vikir was brought before Baron Gambino, the Baron examined him closely and thought to himself that Vikir looked even better up close. Addressing Vikir, Baron Gambino declared that he now belonged to him and assured him that he was not a bad person, urging him not to be nervous. However, his next words and perverted expression left Vikir uncomfortable as the Baron spoke of the many ways he could play with him and how he was already looking forward to it. Suddenly, Vikir placed his hands in front of the Baron, who was puzzled and asked if he wanted him to undo his handcuffs. But before the Baron could react, Vikir broke the handcuffs with ease, stunning both the Baron and his attendant. Without hesitation, Vikir kicked the Baron, sending him flying down to the ground. Vikir then grabbed the Baron's back with his hand and proposed a game, which he named Spear and Shield. As he squeezed the Baron's back, Vikir explained that he would be the spear, and if the Baron, as the shield, could endure his attack, he would win. The Baron shouted in pain and called out to Cindy for help, but before she could move, the Baron had already lost consciousness. Vikir looked at the Baron and declared that he had fainted, meaning that he had won the game. He then took off the fake hair he was wearing, revealing his true identity as Vikir van Baskerville. Cindy Windy, the Baron's attendant, instantly recognized him and exclaimed his name. However, Vikir ignored her and instead turned to the Baron, asking if he was dead. The crowd was shocked to see Vikir there and started murmuring amongst themselves, wondering if Vikir was here then who was the underdog city's new deputy consul. Someone even questioned why a Baskerville Hound was present here. Meanwhile, Chihuahua, who was among the crowd, thought to himself how the deputy consul had turned the situation into something big. Vikir then looked at the crowd and remarked that the circus was a suitable name for this place. His eyes and smile turned menacing as he warned everyone not to think they could leave in one piece. Vikir stood in the middle of the auction room, unarmed and surrounded by guards. The atmosphere was tense as everyone watched in worry, unsure of what would happen next. The auctioneer was clearly unhappy with the situation and shouted at the guards to just kill Vikir, not caring about his status as the deputy consul. The guards started attacking Vikir. However, before they could reach him, Beelzebub emerged from Vikir's hands and his sword reached them first and sliced through them with ease. The auctioneer was terrified by the red and horrific aura emanating from Vikir and realized that Vikir was no ordinary person. As one of the guards prepared to swing a metal ball attached to a chain towards Vikir, he quickly ran towards him and sliced through both the ball and the guard effortlessly. The auctioneer's thoughts were racing as he tried to make sense of what was happening. He couldn't believe that Vikir was a graduator, that too at such a young age. Graduators were the ultimate weapons that represented a nation's strength. He knew that they didn't stand a chance at winning if Vikir was their opponent. Suddenly, Chihuahua spoke up, revealing that he had never expected the deputy consul's swordsmanship skills to be so irregular. However, he was soon shocked by something he saw. As Vikir continued to fight, he suddenly heard a laugh coming from behind him. He turned around to see the auctioneer holding a knife to Chihuahua's throat. The auctioneer demanded that Vikir drop his weapon and surrender, threatening to kill Chihuahua if he didn't comply. Vikir remained calm and stood his ground, causing the auctioneer to become even more agitated. Chihuahua, whose throat was still being held by the knife, reassured Vikir that he was alright and urged him to look after himself. The auctioneer was angry at Chihuahua's words and tried to stop him from talking, but Chihuahua remained steadfast in his loyalty to his superior. Vikir laughed at Chihuahua's words, impressed by his dedication, and assured him that he had received a trump card from the patriarch Hugo. Vikir revealed a flute attached to his leg, causing the auctioneer to become confused and ask what he was planning to do with it. Chihuahua also saw the whistle and thought about its significance. Vikir, with the flute in his hand, stepped forward in front of the crowd. Without any warning, he put the flute in his mouth and blew it with all his might. The sound was so loud that it echoed throughout the entire room. The people in the crowd covered their ears with their hands and shouted in pain, trying to protect themselves from the deafening noise. When Vikir finished playing the flute, everyone looked at him in silence, trying to understand what had just happened. The auctioneer, who was in charge of the event, realized that everything was fine. He seemed to be relieved that nothing had happened and laughed it off as a scare tactic and said that even a graduator can't do anything here. However, the situation took a deadly turn as the auctioneer's throat was pierced by a sword from behind. And before the auctioneer could even realize what was happening, his head was sliced off. The killer stood there wearing a hood. As the hooded figure stood beside Chihuahua, Chihuahua watched the dead auctioneer in shock. One of the guards present tried to attack the hooded figure, asking who he was. But the hooded figure effortlessly flicked his sword and the attack was covered in a dense red aura, which shredded the guard into pieces. As the other guards watched in horror, Vikir had a smirk on his face, seemingly pleased with the chaos unfolding around him. Suddenly, more people wearing hoods appeared at the location, and there were a lot of them. Each of them emitted a powerful aura, and the cold look in their eyes could pierce someone's soul. One of the guards tried to guess who they were, but he could barely get the words out of his mouth due to fear. Another guard prayed, hoping that they weren't who he thought they were. Cindy Windy, who was present there, recognized the teeth symbol on their chests and identified them as the Empire's most brutal Night Order, known as the Annihilation Experts. All 100 knights from the order were graduators, and they were the Baskerville clan's Pitbull Night Order. Just then, one of the Pitbull Knights appeared behind Cindy, ready to draw his sword and cut her down. She was filled with fear, thinking that she couldn't die in a place like this. But suddenly, Vikir appeared in front of her and stopped the knight, commanding him to leave her alive. The knight backed off and knelt down, showing respect to Vikir. Vikir ordered the knight to rip the rest of them to shreds and kill them, but he told the knight not to kill those who were lying down obediently. However, if they moved even a little, he ordered the knight to kill them relentlessly. The knight disappeared, saying that he heard and obeyed. Vikir was relieved that he was able to take the pit bulls without any trouble, knowing that Hugo was very sensitive about military power. The chance to order the Pitbull Order was the reward that Vikir had asked for before leaving for Underdog City. The cries of people being cut down by the Pitbull Order could be heard throughout the area. One guy, lying on the ground in fear, thought to himself that he should just stay down and run away when things quietened down. However, a Pitbull Knight suddenly appeared in front of him, causing him to squeal in terror. He begged the knight, saying that he would obediently wear the cuffs. The Pitbull Knight responded by saying that they don't carry things like cuffs around. The guy was confused and asked what would happen to him then. Suddenly, the Pitbull Knight sliced off his legs, causing him to scream in pain. The knight coldly stated that those who were going to be executed didn't need their legs. A man with a cigar in his mouth stood beside Vikir. He was the commander of the Pitbull Knights, Bastontrier Le Baskerville. He asked Vikir how he felt about using the Pitbull Knights and if he was satisfied with their performance. Vikir replied that he was satisfied, and Bastontrier offered to help him with anything else he needed. Bastontrier took a good look at Vikir and thought to himself that he understood why brother Hugo was so interested in him. He was already fierce and cruel at the young age of 15. Bastontrier placed his hand on Vikir's head and invited him to come to the Pitbull Knights later, promising to raise him properly. Vikir hesitated and said he would think about it. As he started to leave, he mentioned an urgent matter that he needed to attend to. Bastontrier watched Vikir leave and couldn't help but feel ignored. He thought to himself that he wanted Vikir even more now. As Vikir left, he thought to himself that Bastontrier was burdensome. Vikir stepped into the dimly lit storeroom, his eyes scanning and searching for something as he muttered to himself. He was sure that what he was looking for was around here. As he looked around, his gaze fell upon a large safe in the corner of the room. He wondered if this was the safe where the noble's payment was stored. He thought about giving all this money to City Hall for taxation, but quickly pushed those thoughts aside, realizing that they weren't important at the moment. Turning away from the safe, he noticed a cage nearby that was covered with a cloth. His expression turned to one of determination as he muttered to himself that the reason he came to the storeroom wasn't for money but something else. With a sense of purpose, Vikir walked over to the cage and removed the cloth covering it, revealing a battered and bruised girl lying inside crying out in pain. as tears silently streamed down her cheeks. Vikir gazed at the girl who lay in the cage, tears streaming down her face. From the bruises and injury marks on her body, it was apparent that she had been tormented before being brought here. With a disapproving click of his tongue, Vikir took out a potion from his pack and said that the girl was fortunate enough to receive it. It was a potion he had obtained from the Night Order, which they had given him out of the goodness of his heart. Vikir then poured the potion into the barbarian girl's mouth, and its effects could be seen immediately as the bruises and injury marks on her body began to heal visibly, right before his eyes. Suddenly, the girl's eyes fluttered open, but she recoiled in fear when she saw Vikir standing before her. Perplexed, Vikir asked why she was so surprised, but the girl just looked at him questioningly. Without a word, Vikir rose to his feet and unlocked the cage door. In the barbarian language, he ordered the girl to go. The girl appeared to understand what Vikir was trying to convey, but still looked at him with confusion. Vikir thought about how he had learned some of the basics of the barbarian language during his fights against them before his regression. Pointing towards the exit, Vikir spoke again in the barbarian language, this time instructing the girl to run away. In response, the girl spoke something in her native tongue, but Vikir was unable to comprehend it. He admitted to the girl that he wasn't very fluent in the barbarian language. Just before departing, the barbarian girl looked back and said something to Vikir in her native language, and even though he couldn't understand her words, Vikir concluded that she was probably thanking him. Vikir then took out another cloth, revealing the reason he had come to the storage area. As Vikir stood with the cloth in his hand, he looked at what he had been searching for, Merciel's corpse. He approached the corpse and examined it closely, relieved to find that it was still intact. Suddenly, Vikir's hand began to emit a red aura, and Beelzebub emerged from it. With a grin on his face, Vikir told Beelzebub that it had been a while since Beelzebub had feasted on an Arank monster, but it would be allowed to eat it soon. He reminded Beelzebub that the Pitbull order was due to arrive shortly, and therefore it needed to finish its meal quickly. In response, Beelzebub made a pleased noise, expressing gratitude to Vikir for this incredible feast. The news of the new deputy consul's actions against the criminal organization spread like wildfire. As the sun rose, rumors circulated that the nobles and others involved in the illegal slave auction were now prisoners in the Underdog City prison with their limbs torn off. The den of the large demon in Underdog City, burning suspension, burned down and vanished completely. The heads of the club's VIPs were put on display, creating more awareness of criminal activities. The 7 original clans, who lost their children, sent written protests to the administrative office, but Vikir's reply was firm. He stated that the death penalty was the only punishment for those involved in the imperial family's most forbidden act of illegal slave trading. Bank drafts, ledger books, and information about the criminals' cash transactions were all taken into custody. The Baskerville clan was currently investigating the incident, and was going to report its findings to the imperial family. After hearing that, the written protests from the 7 families eventually came to a halt. The patriarchs of each of the 7 families personally came to the administrative office, marking an unprecedented situation where they had to plead with their enemy who had killed their sons. Vikir's response was simple. The black ledgers that were inside burning suspension had already been investigated. In accordance with the Baskerville self-governing dominion, the 7 families' assets would be confiscated, and, on the charge of treason, 3 generations would be destroyed. Due to the new deputy consul being appointed, the floors of the execution ground were filled with the dirty blood of the city's corrupt vermin. As a result of this, public officials and related subcontractors needed manpower, which led to a decrease in unemployment rates in the Underdog City. The collapse of the illegal underground auction led to a surge in tax revenue, and the welfare of the Underdog City was restored. Vikir's stock price increased daily because of the citizens of the Underdog City. Chihuahua stood holding a coffee cup as he approached Vikir, the consul, and said that he had brought coffee. Vikir responded by telling Chihuahua that he didn't need to bring him coffee since he was the office manager. However, Chihuahua insisted that it was his way of thanking Vikir for saving him from a potential stabbing by the clown during the slave auctions. Vikir smiled and joked that Chihuahua was being stingy by giving him coffee in exchange for saving his life. Chihuahua responded by explaining that he had put 2 spoons of sugar, creamer, and a little bit of water in the coffee. Chihuahua then changed the topic and asked about Vikir's transcribing training. Vikir handed over a paper sheet and asked Chihuahua to take a look at it for him. Chihuahua was surprised at how good Vikir's writing was despite not having learned how to write for very long. Vikir humbly stated that he still had a lot to learn and praised Chihuahua's abilities as the office manager. Chihuahua thought to himself that Vikir was an amazing person, having the ability to create new laws and comprehend knowledge of the law. He believed that if the deputy consul stayed in the city, Underdog City would be able to develop even more. In the middle of the night, the sky was filled with clouds, and some moonlight rays escaped and fell into a prison cell. Vikir was standing in the cell, facing a prisoner who was none other than Cindy Windy, Baron Gambino's attendant whom Vikir had saved previously in the slave auctions. Cindy Windy had handcuffs on her hands and a blindfold covering her eyes. Vikir apologized for not being able to visit her sooner, and explained that he had been busy with other matters. He asked her a question to confirm that her name was Cindy Windy Senrose, but she didn't answer his question and instead asked why he had let her live. Vikir removed the blindfold covering her eyes and replied that reason he had saved her was that he had some questions he wanted to ask her. Cindy Windy looked at him with disdain and questioned if that was the only reason he kept her alive. Vikir didn't answer the question and turned around and said that after investigating, he had discovered that the reason Baron Gambino, who was just an ordinary homosexual, was able to increase his power so quickly, and the reason was due to Cindy Windy's abilities to earn money. He added that if she had been able to grow her talent in a place other than an underworld family, she would have been able to become a great merchant or banker. Vikir then placed a chair in front of Cindy and sat down on it. He made her an offer, promising to let her go if she answered his questions but warning of consequences if she refused. Cindy bit her lips in anger but eventually agreed to answer if she could. Vikir looked at Cindy and asked about his performance as a law enforcer. Cindy responded with a mocking smile, saying that a reputable magistrate has graced the city with his presence. Vikir was not satisfied with her response and expressed his concern that he cannot uphold his promise if she doesn't take him seriously. Cindy sighed in annoyance and finally gave in, admitting that she thinks he was doing well. Vikir gazed at Cindy with a cold, calculating look in his eyes. Suddenly, his expression changed and a grin spread across his face. He rose from his chair and strode towards Cindy, grabbing her chin and bringing his face closer to hers. With a deep voice, he asked her why she thought he was doing well as a law enforcer. Cindy's face was covered in cold sweat as she looked at Vikir's red eyes. Vikir released her chin and walked towards a nearby chair. He turned to Cindy and asked her to speak her mind. Cindy gritted her teeth in anger and began to explain her perspective. She reminded Vikir that, as a consul, the concept of virtue had always been considered one of the most important factors. While Vikir's laws might take care of street criminals and raise his own dignity, they would ultimately result in the deaths and suffering of many citizens. In the long term, such laws would only fuel hatred and rage among the people. Cindy then looked directly at Vikir and warned him that the Baskervilles would not welcome him once he gained more power than the clan leader in Underdog City. Vikir concluded from Cindy's explanation that if he continued down this path, he would be hated by the people and become a target of the Baskervilles. He asked for Cindy's advice on what he should do next. Cindy replied that Vikir should return all his authority to the Baskerville clan, along with the glory of the events that happened here. She suggested that he give them to the clan leader. In order to avoid further attention, she advised him to go to either the La Rougette La Noire mountain or the academy in the center of the empire. These were places where people of his age and status were common, allowing him to hide his powers and wash his identity. Cindy assured Vikir that when the time comes, the Baskerville clan leader would be the one who suffers in his stead. After hearing Cindy's advice, Vikir remained silent for a few moments. Suddenly, Cindy felt a surge of bloodlust, and she shuddered at the feeling. Vikir's voice broke the silence as he expressed his understanding of Cindy's suggestion, remarking that it was like asking a hunting dog to bite off its own owner's neck. He looked at Cindy with a great amount of bloodlust and killing intent, waiting for her response. However, Cindy did not show any fear. Instead, she looked at Vikir with a calm gaze and replied that it was the only way for him to avoid the Baskervilles' hatred. Vikir smiled faintly and said he would keep her advice in mind. He added that Cindy's ideas were almost identical to his. Then, Vikir surprised Cindy by opening her handcuffs and freeing her. Cindy asked him if he was really letting her go, to which Vikir replied that he always kept his promises. Cindy walked past Vikir and expressed her hope that he would never come to regret what had happened today. However, before she could leave, Vikir asked her if she knew of a clan called the Mesimaginero. Vikir continued to narrate a story about the Mesimaginero clan. He explained that there were more than just the well-known 7 clans among the founding clans of the Underdog City. The Mesimaginero clan was a prosperous merchant clan and was the 8th clan. However, their prosperity came to an end due to an unfortunate event. During a birthday celebration, the youngest son of the Mesimaginero clan showed off his newly learned sword skills, and the people of Baskerville couldn't believe what they saw. The sword technique that the young child had learned was none other than the secret Baskerville sword techniques, which only members of the family knew. The news soon reached the leader of the Baskerville clan, and they believed that top-secret military information had been leaked. The Baskerville clan released the hunting dogs, causing the Mesimaginero clan to go extinct. However, there was someone behind the scenes pulling the strings. The young demons of the 7 clans had stolen the sword techniques from the Baskerville clan and allowed the young child of the Mesimaginero clan to learn them. Cindy looked at Vikir and forced a smile, asking what the story of the 8th clan had to do with her. Vikir didn't answer her question and went on to reveal that there was actually a survivor from the Mesimaginero clan massacre. The girl was only 1 year old when she was taken from the devastation and subjected to cruel and unusual torture simply because she was beautiful. The acts they committed were too foul for even Vikir to talk about. Cindy couldn't bear it and started to walk away with an angry expression, telling Vikir she didn't want to hear his story anymore. But Vikir continued, saying that there was more to the story. A new deputy consul was appointed to the city and he managed to bring the old problems to light, punishing the 7 idiots who committed the heinous crime. They were thoroughly tortured and made to admit their crimes before they met their end. In their last moments, they expressed remorse for their actions, and their last words were, "I'm sorry for committing such a heinous crime." Cindy turned back and tears streamed down her face. She asked Vikir who the 7 young masters were apologizing. Vikir looked at her calmly and replied that they should apologize to the young girl who had used the fake name Cindy Wendy Senrose and was the sole survivor of the Mesimaginero clan. With tears still flowing, Cindy asked Vikir how she was supposed to believe him, given that he had taken them and tortured them. She questioned how she could trust that they had truly apologized. Vikir picked up a fire torch and replied that the easiest way for her to believe him would be to see it with her own eyes. Vikir took Cindy to the prison cell where the 7 young masters were held before their deaths, and urged her to take a look. Cindy's eyes widened with surprise as she saw that the prisoners had written an apology with their own blood on the floor. The apologies read, "We were the ones that drove the Mesimaginero clan to devastation. Forgive us for our crimes." They asked for forgiveness and were scared beyond imagination, pleading to be spared. Cindy's tears continued to flow as she looked at the apologies. She suddenly felt nauseous and started vomiting after seeing the gruesome scene. Vikir walked towards her and said that even though they had all died painful deaths, the Mesimaginero clan's vengeance was not yet over. He informed her that there was still one more clan to deal with. Vikir then urged Cindy to despise the Baskervilles and to remember that she had more than enough right to do so, being a member of the Mesimaginero clan. Cindy wiped her mouth and tears continued to stream down her face. She asked Vikir why he was helping her, given that he was a part of the Baskerville clan. Vikir looked at her with a smirk and replied that she was asking the wrong question. As Cindy got up and started to walk away, she stated that she understood what he was trying to say. She then turned back and addressed Vikir by his full name, Vikir van Baskerville, and promised to repay this debt. As she walked away, she promised that no matter what he did with the rest of his life, she will ensure that he would never have to worry about money again. Vikir watched her departing figure, and after some time, he said that he would remember her promise. Chihuahua rushed to Deputy Consul Vikir's personal room, eager to inform him that it was time to get ready for work. However, as soon as he opened the door, his words got stuck in his mouth as he saw Vikir sleeping peacefully amidst blood-stained sheets and dead bodies scattered around the room. Vikir woke up and rubbed his eyes, greeting Chihuahua with a pleasant good morning. Chihuahua couldn't help but ask about the corpses lying around the room, to which Vikir casually replied that he wasn't sure and that it seemed like he had killed them in his sleep. Chihuahua was taken aback and asked if Vikir was serious, to which Vikir simply laughed and told him that it was just a joke. As they walked down the hallway, Chihuahua asked Vikir about his childhood experiences. Vikir responded by asking if Chihuahua didn't find his earlier joke funny. Chihuahua clarified that it wasn't about the joke being funny or not. Vikir then made a thoughtful expression and thought aloud about the recent inconveniences he had faced. He remembered being hit by 2 poison arrows, drinking poison drinks 4 times, facing acid, snipers, arson, getting run over by a cart, and various other dangerous situations. Scratching his ear, Vikir questioned if he had gathered someone's attention. Chihuahua responded by saying that he thought Vikir had gone insane. Vikir contemplated the skills stored in Beelzebub, the sword summoned from his arm. He couldn't help but be impressed with the effectiveness of the Hellish Buffalo's Tough Life skill, which he had obtained during the last illegal auction. The skill had a risk rating of 1, but it had proven to be even more effective than he had initially thought. All 3 of Beelzebub's slots were filled with skills: Burn Injury Cerberus, Hemorrhage Hellhound, and Tough Life Hellish Buffalo. With the enhancements of the River Styx and Tough Life enhancing his body, even Graduator Class Assassin has been unable to pierce his skin. Despite his satisfaction with the power of his skills, the continued attempts on his life had started to become bothersome. Vikir knew he needed to investigate and put an end to the assassinations. Chihuahua smiled in agreement with his decision. Suddenly, Vikir and Chihuahua noticed a carriage in front of them. They both recognized the flag on the carriage as Baskerville's and expressed surprise that the Baskervilles had arrived there. Vikir looked serious and guessed that they had likely been sent by the main family. As the carriage door opened, the guests began to walk down from it. Chihuahua, who was standing with Vikir, started to sweat profusely as he looked at the guest. As the guest looked at them, Chihuahua stood at attention and wondered if the guest was who he thought he was. On the other hand, Vikir looked calmly at this new guest. This new guest was none other than the head butler John Barrymore. The butler greeted Vikir with a smile, remarking on how it had been a long time since they had last seen each other. Vikir acknowledged his greeting, complimenting the butler on how much better he looked now. The butler approached Vikir, jokingly asking if he really thought so. He then remarked that he had believed Vikir would do well ever since he had left the main residence. Vikir replied modestly, saying that he had just been lucky. As General Secretary Chihuahua stood by, he observed the head butler John Barrymore with a sense of awe. He recognized him as the best head butler of the Barrymore family, who had been serving the notoriously scary Baskerville family for 4 generations. He couldn't believe he was in the presence of his role model. Vikir interrupted Chihuahua's thoughts as he asked head butler what had brought him all the way to their location. The head butler replied that the patriarch had praised Vikir's progress and had ordered him to return to the main residence, seeming very happy about it. Vikir couldn't believe that Hugo could be happy, and he imagined his smiling face in disbelief. The patriarch of the Baskerville clan, Hugo, was reading an article with the title "The Most Beloved Figure of the Underdog Citizens, Vikir." The article detailed how Vikir had won multiple awards, including being the most trusted among merchants, most loved among farmers, most respected among children and scholars, and the most targeted by assassins. Hugo then looked up at Vikir and commented that the Baskervilles were only known for using weapons and not their brains. However, with Vikir's actions, they could change that image. Hugo praised Vikir, telling him that he had done well. Vikir humbly bowed his head and placed his hand on his chest, saying that he had just done what he was supposed to do. However, he couldn't help but wonder if the face Hugo was making was supposed to be a happy face. Hugo declared that one must reward and punish according to the situation. He then announced that Vikir would be the one to attend the academy that year. Upon hearing this, Vikir remained calm and thought to himself that this was expected. He knew that the academy that he would attend was called Colosseo, which was considered the best academy in the empire. The academy catered to the children of aristocracy and royal families and required students to reside in the dormitories for internal security. Vikir saw this as an opportunity to grow stronger while avoiding Hugo's attention. As Hugo continued, he mentioned that he planned to send a few others with Vikir but had yet to choose whom. He then asked Vikir if he had any siblings whom he would like to attend with. Vikir replied that he was closest to Highborough, Middleborough, and Lowborough, all of whom he internally thought of as his potential sandbags. Hugo agreed with Vikir's decision and offered to send those 3 with him. Hugo then asked Vikir if he remembered the plan he had thought of when he was 8 years old. Vikir guessed that Hugo was referring to the plan they had come up with during the joint training with the Morgs. Vikir recalled that the plan was to lend the ruby mines to the Morg family and use them to get rid of the barbarians. With a smirk, Hugo confirmed that the plan had worked. Vikir asked him to clarify, to which Hugo explained that the Morgs had suggested a joint raid and they had been very humble about it. Hugo then suggested that Vikir should go on a territory inspection before entering the academy to check whether the laws he had altered were being upheld. He added that it would be a good experience for Vikir. Vikir bowed his head in agreement and said that he would follow Hugo's orders. Soon Vikir and Chihuahua walked out of the gates as Vikir got ready to depart. Chihuahua waved goodbye to Vikir with tears in his eyes. He addressed Vikir as deputy consul and promised to do his best with the administrative work in the meantime. Vikir turned back to look at Chihuahua and thought to himself that he would soon be parting ways with the Secretary General. As Vikir and his group traveled some distance from the city, Vikir suddenly called out, instructing someone to reveal themselves. Dozens of men dressed in black appeared from hiding places behind Vikir's group, including one who emerged right beside Vikir. Vikir apologized for making the man wait, explaining that he wanted the departure to be orderly. The man removed his head cover, revealing himself to be from the Pitbull Order, and his name was Staffordshire Baskerville. He assured Vikir that they would safely transport him to the Morg's juvenile fortress. Vikir asked about his uncle Bastontrier, and learned that he was doing well, but had become adamant about admitting Vikir into the Pitbull Order following the slave auction incident. However, Vikir internally admitted that his uncle made him feel uncomfortable. Vikir and Staffordshire arrived at an area with hills where they saw farmers working in the fields. Vikir asked if this was the region that they had lent to the morgues, and observed that it didn't seem like anyone was breaking any laws. Staffordshire replied that the envoy team was supposedly sent for territory inspection, but Vikir knew that their real mission was to get rid of the barbarians. Staffordshire informed Vikir that the Morgue family had formed a large group consisting of 3 delegates, 30 lower house parliament members, and about 100 mages who weren't legislative members. Vikir noted that the Morgues seemed to be taking the matter seriously. However, he thought to himself that the Baskervilles had only brought a dozen knights, and himself, a member of the lower house parliament, while the elites were on standby on the other side of the mountain range. He remembered Hugo's advice that it wouldn't be a bad idea to look into the barbarians' lifestyle. As Vikir and Staffordshire continued on their path, they soon spotted a fortress in the distance. Surrounding the fortress were many dead trees, and skeletons hung from their branches. Vikir explained to Staffordshire that a mage must have done this, and this must be a message to the barbarians from the morgues. Staffordshire remarked that it was a scary warning, while Vikir found himself reminiscing about Camus Morgue. He wondered how much she had grown since they last met. As they approached the fortress gate, 3 figures appeared above it, and a voice demanded to know who they were. Vikir and Staffordshire looked up in surprise and saw 3 identical girls standing there, one of whom declared that no one could pass without their permission, while the other 2 repeated her statement in unison. Vikir recognized the 3 girls and realized that they were the Morgue's 3 flowers, the triplets Hysis, Middleseas, and Losis. Their reputation for insanity was well known, and their combined madness was said to reach the heavens. Vikir introduced himself as part of the envoy team from the Baskervilles, who had come to inspect the territory and improve friendly relations. He demanded that the fortress gates be opened for them. However, Hysis refused and said that she needed to report to the person in charge before they could enter. She suggested that they would get a response about tomorrow. Vikir questioned their right to stop him from entering his own land, but the triplets just smirked. Hysis reminded him about the tenant protection law, and mocked him for looking down on them because they were paying rent there. She continued to mock him, saying that the tenant protection law was made by his family. Vikir began to feel a headache and his hands started to glow with a red ore as he became increasingly annoyed by the persistent questions. However, he managed to control his anger and explained that he had made changes to the law to allow him to chase away tenants he didn't like. He reiterated his demand for the gates to be opened one final time, and a wave of killing intent and bloodlust emanated from Vikir, aimed directly at the Morgue's 3 flowers, causing them to look upon Vikir with fear. Amidst this tension, Losis broke out in anger and cast a spell towards Vikir. She stated that she had heard that some psycho kid had taken charge of the underdog city, but they had dealt with enough of such individuals before and knew how to handle him. The spell landed near Vikir, causing his horse to jump to the side in fear. From high above the gate, Losis shouted at the group, demanding that they wait and not enter the Morgue's land without permission. She insulted them, calling them stupid swordsmen. She even threatened to test the strength of the rising star of the Baskerville family. In response, Staffordshire started drawing his sword and said to Vikir that he didn't think the situation could be resolved with words. Vikir agreed with Staffordshire's words, indicating that he was prepared for a fight. As Vikir and Staffordshire were about to react, one of Vikir's group members shouted that the girls didn't even know their place, calling their words absurd. 2 other members echoed his sentiment, saying the words were absurd. Vikir heard the voices and thought that he had heard these voices before. The 3 sisters then spoke, with Hysis saying that the group members were just mere underlings, Middleseas questioning if they thought their ranks were higher than theirs, and Losis saying that they didn't even know their place. The 3 members of Vikir's group stepped forward to confront Morgue's 3 flowers, denying their accusations by saying "not us" repeatedly. The 3 members removed their hoods to reveal their faces, and they were none other than the Baskerville triplets, Highborough, Middleborough, and Lowborough. They stood with confidence and pointed at Vikir while declaring in unison that he was the symbol of Baskerville. The triplets then turned to Vikir and smiled while saying "leave this to us," assuring him that they would handle the situation. Upon hearing their words, Vikir made a strange expression and exclaimed that his annoyance had increased to the power of 2. Vikir found himself questioning the identity and intentions of the individuals before him. Their strange behavior left him bewildered and curious. Highborough glanced back at Vikir, expressing his gratitude for recommending them to the academy. He indicated that Vikir should leave this situation in their capable hands. Vikir's thoughts raced as he began to piece together the situation. It became clear to him that their actions were motivated by their connection to the academy. However, he couldn't help but see them as mere sandbags. Vikir was aware that in the future, the triplets would become murderous soldiers. They lacked the intelligence to make independent judgments but could effectively carry out orders. Vikir believed that with his training, they would prove to be useful. Vikir smiled and expressed his intention to place his trust in the triplets while referring to them as his older brothers. Upon receiving Vikir's affirmation, the Baskerville triplets displayed signs of joy and satisfaction. Morg's three flowers, who had observed this exchange, expressed their disdain for the Baskerville triplets' close bond, labeling them as ignorant fools who relied solely on each other. Unfazed by the taunts, the Baskerville triplets responded defiantly, while showing their middle fingers, and asserted that it was Morg's three flowers who were the real fools. Morg's three flowers were fueled by anger and vowed to discipline the Baskerville triplets for their insolence. Vikir's thoughts shifted as he recalled his past knowledge. Before his regression, he had known the Morg triplets as powerful mages who possessed the attributes of water, earth, and nature. Their combination of highly compatible magic attributes exponentially enhanced the effects of their spells, earning them the title of the Morg's Three Flowers. As the Morg's Three Flowers combined their magical abilities, a colossal vine made of soil and plants emerged, forming a formidable barrier. Hysis, positioned atop the wall, burst into laughter, mocking the Baskerville triplets with her taunts. Middleseas and Losis turned to their adversaries, questioning if they could overcome the obstacle. Undeterred, Hybero readied his sword, dismissing the plant barrier as insignificant. With precision and skill, Hybero executed the Baskerville first technique, effortlessly slicing through the massive vines. Staffordshire marveled at his perfect execution of the first technique. However, before Hybero could fully recover, he sensed an incoming attack. He managed to block a whip-like strike from the vines with his sword, although the force behind it pushed him backward. Middleborough and Lowborough called out in worry as they witnessed Hybero's predicament. Losis wore a smug expression, mocking the Baskerville triplets and asserting that their swords were incapable of reaching them. The Baskerville triplets responded with intense anger, their expressions resembling hounds ready to hunt their prey. Staffordshire turned to Vikir and asked him if he found the situation enjoyable. Perplexed, Vikir questioned what Staffordshire was referring to. Staffordshire explained the ongoing clash between magic and swordsmanship, highlighting the long-standing debate about which is stronger. Magic utilizes surrounding mana to amplify and reproduce elemental powers, while swordsmanship channels the user's energy and mana for explosive and enduring strength. Staffordshire found pleasure in observing the potential and talents of the clans of mages and swordsmen who would shape the future. Vikir said that if viewed from that perspective, he was also a part of them. Staffordshire commented that Vikir had already surpassed others his age. Vikir, uninterested in the ongoing fight, expressed his frustration and wished for all of them to perish. He felt that it was a waste of time, as he had important tasks to attend to, having recently found a supervisor with a significant workload. Just then, someone arrived at the scene and began casting a fiery spell. Anger infused her voice as she questioned what the others were doing in front of her territory. Hybero, who was busy fighting, took the opportunity to attack Hysis, believing he had the upper hand. However, the situation quickly changed as they noticed a massive fire approaching them. They were taken aback and shocked by the unexpected turn of events. A tremendous explosion of fire engulfed the area, causing tension in Staffordshire but eliciting a smile from Vikir, who wondered if everyone had perished. To Vikir's annoyance, he realized that the Baskerville triplets had survived the attack. He looked at them with a displeased expression, uttering a disapproving sound. Hybero, in a state of shock, questioned the sudden appearance of fire magic. Middleborough shouted at the figures behind the smoke wall, expressing frustration at the near-death experience they had just encountered. Behind the dissipating smoke, the three flowers of the Morg clan were in tears. Middleseas, still shaken from the near-death experience, expressed her relief at having survived. Hysis chimed in, acknowledging that if she had dodged the attack even slightly later, she might not have been so fortunate. Losis, scared and seeking comfort, voiced her fears to her older sisters. The person responsible for the powerful fire spell questioned the situation and asked what was going on here. Vikir looked up at the figure who had unleashed the attack. It was Camus Morg, standing atop the castle gate wall with flames still burning in her hands. Camus looked down and declared her inability to forgive anyone who caused trouble within her managed territory. As she landed in front of Morg's three flowers, Middleseas tried to explain that their intention was to stop the invader, while Losis added that the fight had been initiated by the other party. Camus cast a cold gaze upon them and questioned their informal way of addressing her as Camus, emphasizing her position as the vice head of the fortress. Middle Sis couldn't help but shudder in fear, denying any disrespect and quickly correcting herself, addressing Camus with the appropriate honorific. Camus then pointed towards the treetops where dead skeletons hung, warning them to be cautious if they wished to avoid a similar fate. Middleseas let out a frightened cry and apologized for their actions. Camus noticed Vikir, and her eyes widened in shock. She approached him and remarked that it had been a long time since they had seen each other, recalling that it had been 7 years. Vikir smiled and acknowledged that it had been a while, and he greeted her as Camus Morgue. Vikir wondered if Camus's more mature appearance was the reason for her increased attractiveness. He pondered the beauty of Camus Morgue, who had captivated the hearts of many men in high society. In his previous life, there had been scandals and rumors surrounding her, as she allured even married men. However, he found it strange that there were no such rumors in this lifetime. Nevertheless, he brushed off those thoughts. Vikir straightforwardly requested Camus to open the door, stating that words wouldn't work on the triplets. Camus was taken aback by his blunt words. She looked angry and questioned if that was all he had to say after such a long time. Vikir gazed at her with a look of curiosity and inquired about what he should say instead. Camus's anger flared, and she exclaimed in frustration. Staffordshire observed Camus's escalating anger and wondered if the next fight would be between the superstars of the two clans. Camus pointed her finger at Vikir. Her eyes filled with angry tears, and declared that he scored 0 points. She accused him of having a disrespectful attitude towards his future wife, giving him a score of 0 out of 100. The Morgue's 3 flowers, the Baskerville triplets, Vikir, and Staffordshire all looked at Camus Morgue in disbelief. Camus averted her gaze to the side, her face blushing, and muttered a huff. Everyone present was left with the same question in their minds. Whose wife? Vikir and Camus rode their horses together, making their way toward the fortress. Camus remarked that the Baskerville clan seemed to have little knowledge about the barbarians. Vikir confidently replied that they were well aware of the barbarians and fought against them frequently. He claimed that they knew more about the barbarians than Morgues did. Camus questioned why Vikir had sent the idiots then, referring to the Baskerville triplets, whom she considered young and foolish hounds. Vikir explained that it had already been agreed with the Morgue clan that the main force would be positioned on the other side of the mountain range. He questioned why Camus was asking when she already knew the arrangement. Camus smiled and remarked that she believed Vikir might not be well informed about barbarians. Vikir retorted, asserting that as the person in charge of the delegation, he naturally possessed extensive knowledge. Camus said that despite being someone whom the clan might have wanted to discard, he seemed to be quite trusted within the clan. The topic shifted to which of the barbaric tribes was the most annoying. Vikir looked at Camus and thought to himself that she kept asking questions. He then mentioned the warrior tribe called Balak and the sorcerer tribe known as Rococo. He emphasized the exceptional archery skills of the Balaks, which surpassed those of the Empire. He also mentioned that this information was not widely known. Camus acknowledged Vikir's knowledge about the ecology of the barbaric tribes and awarded him 8 points out of 100 in her own unique scoring system. Confused, Vikir questioned the purpose of the points. Camus simply replied that it was because he had answered well. Vikir looked at her with a hint of curiosity. Camus continued her evaluation of Vikir, expressing her dislike for intelligent men and stating that she found men more interesting when they were a little foolish. Firstly, Camus turned her attention to horseback riding, remarking that Vikir's choice of a large horse was ill-suited for his shorter stature. She considered this a flaw and decided to deduct 6 points. Continuing her evaluation, she moved on to fashion and expressed her disappointment with Vikir's lackluster clothing choices, assigning him a mere 4 points in this category. When she noticed that Vikir was ignoring her, she gave him just 1 point for his mannerisms. Camus then smiled and awarded his face 99 points. However, due to his poor control over his facial expressions, she deducted 1 point. Vikir, growing frustrated, told Camus to stop the useless evaluation. Camus questioned why it was useless, asserting that she needed to be stern with her future husband. Vikir, perplexed, asked why he was considered her future husband. Camus reminded him of a test he had passed previously, which was conducted by her uncle. Vikir realized she was referring to an incident that happened 7 years ago when he had dueled Camus' uncle to test his abilities as a potential husband. Camus became angry, expressing her dissatisfaction with her uncle's decision and how it had obstructed her path to marriage. She reluctantly acknowledged the promise that had been made and decided to follow through with it, although she resented the situation. While Camus was venting her frustrations, Vikir observed her and acknowledged her prowess as a great fire mage. Interrupting her, Vikir declared that he had forgotten about what happened that day, and that he would make it as if it never occurred. Camus's face flushed red after hearing this, and she threw a jacket at Vikir. She exclaimed that he couldn't simply reverse something that had happened and called him a dummy. She referred to herself as a genius and boasted that once she witnessed something, she never forgot it. Vikir looked at the jacket that Camus had thrown at him and realized that it was the same jacket he had given her during their duel 7 years ago when her clothes had burnt. Camus, with a red face, dismissed Vikir's words as nonsense. Vikir examined the jacket and wondered if she had returned it without washing it. As they reached the outskirts of the fortress, Camus informed Vikir that the barbarians had ambushed the ruby mine, either pillaging the indigenous slaves or the crops. She explained that they took slaves to sell them elsewhere. She pointed out a wall that had been built by both earth and iron mages over the course of a month. Impressed, Vikir acknowledged the skill of the morgue mages, noting that it would have taken several hundred regular people around a year to achieve the same result. Camus proudly affirmed his observation. Vikir noticed some large holes in the wall and asked if they were caused by the arrows shot by the Balaks. Camus confirmed that the arrows carried a strong aura and had caused numerous casualties during nighttime guard duty. She mentioned that the arrows were capable of breaking through 2 to 3 meters thick walls, showcasing the unmatched talent of the Balaks. She revealed that her uncle had suffered a severe chest injury from the arrows that breached the shield's magic, but fortunately, he survived, albeit with wounded pride. Vikir recalled that the patriarch of his clan had a similar experience and had injured his nose bridge. Curious, Vikir inquired about the talented individual among the barbarians, to which Camus responded that she believed it was a female. Due to their black painted faces, it was challenging to discern their physical traits. Vikir and Camus turned around as a mage approached them, addressing Camus as the vice head of the fortress. The mage reported that a recon member of the barbarians had been captured and urged them to come quickly. Curious and concerned, Camus and Vikir followed the mage to a tent where the captive barbarian was being held. Vikir observed the barbarian and identified him as a member of the Rococo sorcerer tribe. Camus inquired if any information had been extracted from him. The mage informed them that the barbarian remained uncooperative and resistant to psychic magic due to his strong sorcery, making it impossible to read his mind. Camus then questioned the barbarian about the recent ambush on the Mork clan's fortress and asked him if he remembered how many people they had kidnapped. When the barbarian remained silent, she further added that among the victims, there was a daughter of the Morks. Her name was Rose, and she was Camus' sixth cousin. She asked the barbarian what had been done to her. The barbarian responded with a smile and spoke something in his native barbarian language. Camus turned to the mage and requested a translation, asking about the whereabouts of the barbarian who rebelled. The mage reported that when the barbarians attacked, everyone at the fortress had either died or been taken away. Camus then asked if there was anyone present who could translate what the barbarian was saying, to which the mage replied that, at that moment, there was no one available. Suddenly, Vikir spoke up, stating that he knew a little of the Rococo language. Camus expressed surprise, questioning what Vikir didn't know how to do. Vikir clarified that he was not fluent and only had a basic understanding of the vocabulary. Camus requested Vikir to ask the barbarian about the whereabouts of her kidnapped sixth cousin, describing her as a 12-year-old girl with red eyes, red hair, and white skin. Vikir posed the question to the barbarian in the barbarian language, and the barbarian responded with an evil smile and gave him a short reply. Vikir closed his eyes and relayed the grim news to Camus: her cousin was dead. Camus's face filled with anger upon hearing this. She declared that since the senator of the audience hall was currently being treated and the senator of the temple was away on an inspection, the decision would be made by her, Camus Morgue, a member of the middle house and the vice head of the fortress. She declared the verdict: immediate execution. A spike pierced the barbarian's body, and soon he was consumed by fire. As the barbarian burned, he uttered something, but Camus dismissed his words, saying that after the war, the language he spoke would only be used in hell. The barbarian's companion watched in horror as he met his fiery demise. Camus, still filled with anger, turned around and urged Vikir to follow her. Vikir silently observed her departing figure. As Vikir exited the tent, he was greeted by the sight of Camus crying out loud. He walked towards her, recognizing that despite her tough exterior, she was still only 15 years old. Vikir asked her about her close relationship with her cousin, and Camus confirmed that they were indeed very close. She described her cousin as a pure child who didn't fit into the cold-hearted Morgue clan. Vikir tried to console her, saying that he believed her cousin had left this world comfortably. However, Camus looked at him and expressed her doubts, stating that she was a genius and understood a little of what was said. She asked him to tell her honestly if what she heard was true. Vikir felt tense and wondered if she had understood the barbarian's words correctly. What the barbarian had said previously was, "We ate her." Tears once again flooded Camus's eyes, and she fell to her knees, apologizing for not being able to protect her younger cousin. Vikir witnessed her anguish and initially extended his hand to comfort her. However, he hesitated and retracted his hand back. Camus's cries filled the air, leaving Vikir standing there, pondering the situation. After some time, Camus managed to stop crying and wipe the tears from her eyes. She expressed that it wasn't a bad thing, stating that if someone had shown half-hearted sympathy, she would have killed them. Looking at Vikir, she declared that it was not the time to mourn and that she needed to quickly regain her composure and seek revenge. Vikir observed her strength and determination, acknowledging that heroines were indeed different. He extended his hand toward Camus, agreeing with her sentiment. However, before she could take his hand, a loud voice sounded, resembling a bell-like sound. Vikir questioned the source of the sound, and Camus stood up, explaining that it was the signal that notified them of a barbarian attack. Vikir remarked that her time for revenge had come rather quickly. Somewhere outside the fortress, a group of barbarian girls sat on white wolves, armed with arrows and bows in their hands. Their leader prepared an arrow and shot it toward the guards standing on the fortress walls. Caught off guard, the guards were unable to react in time, and the arrow caused a devastating explosion in their vicinity. The barbarian girl then ordered her companions to begin attacking. The barbarian, along with her wolves, engaged in a fierce battle against the soldiers of the Morgue clan. The wolves attacked with ferocity while the barbarians slashed at their enemies. They used ropes to tie the soldiers' necks, incapacitating them. Just as the chaotic scene unfolded, Vikir arrived and witnessed the gruesome sight. He wondered if he had arrived too quickly, observing the intense fight between the Morgue soldiers and the barbarians. Suddenly, a rope flew toward him and wrapped tightly around his neck. Vikir looked ahead with a questioning gaze and realized that two barbarian girls had skillfully used ropes to secure it around his neck. They spoke in their native language, mentioning something about catching a good one and the hunt for husbands going well. Vikir realized their intention and thought to himself about the barbarians hunting for husbands. He deduced that they were capturing people to become suitors, aiming to breed a superior race for their tribe. Swiftly, Vikir caught hold of the rope and swung it, causing the girls who held the leash to be flung into the air. Vikir simply said that he couldn't be their husband and that he might already be engaged. As the two barbarian girls slammed into the ground, the male barbarians watched in shock. They began preparing for an arrow attack, uncertain of Vikir's affiliation. One of them questioned his companion if Vikir was part of the enemy forces. Undeterred by the situation, Vikir didn't back down. He boldly moved forward, heading straight toward the incoming arrows. In his mind, he recalled Hugo's eager request for him to avoid initiating a battle before joining up with the main force. He contemplated whether he should wait for the main force to arrive. With determination, Vikir drew his sword and swiftly cut down the incoming arrows with precise strikes, showcasing his skill and agility. The barbarians were shocked by Vikir's display of skill and expressed their disbelief. However, their surprise was short-lived as a sudden fire attack engulfed them, causing them to cry out in pain. Camus, who had used the fire spell, appeared behind Vikir and expressed her anger towards the barbarians, declaring their demise. Vikir observed Camus with surprise as he realized that she had turned the entire area into a sea of fire. Camus questioned Vikir, asking if he had used liquid aura, implying that she recognized his abilities as a graduator. She stated that she knew he was the only man she could acknowledge. Vikir confirmed that he had received an order from the Patriarch to avoid battles until regrouping with the main force. Undeterred, Camus began casting multiple spells and questioned if it was an order from Baskerville's Patriarch. She then asserted that a Baskerville should refrain from intervening, as she intended to eliminate all the barbarians. Camus unleashed a series of powerful attacks, burning a vast area in front of them. Vikir looked in shock and recognized the spell as burn. He also noticed that she was employing a quadra casting technique for burning spells, and he observed an increase in the lethality of her attacks. Camus, driven by the desire to avenge her younger cousin, continued to cast spells, determined to carry out her revenge. Suddenly, a barbarian used a dart blower and blew a needle that landed on Camus' neck. She felt the sting and realized she had been poisoned. Camus noticed a barbarian sitting on a wolf's back who had attacked her. She fell to the ground, unable to move due to the numbing poison. Vikir observed her condition and thought to himself that she was quite a handful. The barbarian then threw a rope toward Camus, but Vikir swiftly caught it before it could reach her. Camus acknowledged his catch and complimented him. Vikir looked at her and suggested that it would be better for them to retreat. Camus questioned what would happen to the farmlands and the captives. Vikir replied that it would be wiser to avoid engaging in battles until the main force from Baskerville arrived. Camus, determined to avenge her cousin who had been taken away by the barbarians, refused to retreat. Vikir looked at her and urged her to make a rational decision. However, in the next moment, Vikir sensed an arrow attack approaching from behind his head. With quick reflexes, he managed to dodge the arrow just in time. Vikir observed the barbarian girl who had launched the arrow and wondered if this was the destructive power Camus had mentioned earlier. However, while lost in his thoughts, a barbarian arrived behind him and swiftly took Camus away. In desperation, Camus called out Vikir's name, desperately seeking his help. Vikir watched the scene unfold in frustration and contemplated the situation. He recalled a time in the past when Camus Morgue, still an adolescent, was held captive but returned after annihilating the barbarians. Despite her reputation as the Queen of La Rouge et La Noire, Vikir realized that he needed to do what was necessary. Suddenly, the barbarian girl lunged at Vikir, launching an attack. With remarkable agility, he swiftly evaded her strike, his senses sharpened. To his astonishment, he discovered that she had used a bow to attack him. The barbarian girl immediately followed up with a kick that sent Vikir sliding back. Vikir assessed the situation and thought that her movements were different from the other barbarians. He wondered if he needed to go all out against her. However, to his surprise, the barbarian girl attempted to speak in his language. She said, "You, me, we meet again." Vikir looked at her and realized that this barbarian girl was the one he had freed during the slave auctions. He couldn't help but call her a bastard in his mind. The barbarian girl looked at Vikir with a smirk and said, "We meet